It all began under the cloak of darkness on a June night in 1972 when 5 men broke into the DNC headquarters in Washington, D.C. They were there at the behest of Richard Nixon's committee to re-elect the president. They had been there once before in May. The motive for those break-ins has never been clear, though the burglars themselves believed that they were undertaking an officially sanctioned government operation seeking to unearth supposed evidence of Cuban financial support for election campaigns. For the next 2 years, several of the president's advisors undertook a series of actions designed to cover up the White House's involvement in those operations. And when the famous Watergate tapes finally surfaced, it became clear that the president himself was not above suspicion. It all culminated in the summer of 1974 in what came to be known as the Summer of Watergate. Most of you are old enough to remember it well. Every day, it seemed, brought new revelations, new twists, new turns in the sordid drama. Impeachment proceedings were instituted, and it became clear that Richard Nixon's presidency was doomed. And 40 years ago, yesterday, he left office, having given his resignation speech the day before in one of the most riveting moments in modern history. "I have never been a quitter," he told the nation in a televised speech. "To leave office before my term is completed is abhorrent to every instinct in my body." He never acknowledged guilt. Indeed, he suggested that he could have fought and could have been vindicated. Earlier, Richard Nixon's vice president, Spiro T. Agnew, had gone down in flames over tax matters. As a result, the sitting vice president was Gerald R. Ford, a longtime member of Congress who, under the 25th Amendment to our Constitution, was appointed to that office. Upon Nixon's resignation, he ascended to the presidency, making him the only president or vice president to ever serve without being elected by the Electoral College. Needless to say, all of this created great turmoil in a country already racked by years and years of struggle over civil rights and Vietnam and women's rights. Many wondered if, in the words of Lincoln, this nation could long endure. It was deemed a constitutional crisis by some. The country was greatly torn by the whole affair and badly battered. Few presidents have faced such a challenge as that which faced a former football player from Michigan. Nixon's resignation, however, did not end the controversy. Indeed, many were calling for his arrest, and lawyers across the land debated how that would play out. The nation was in an uproar, and as a result, 1 month later, on September 8th, the new president took a step that caught many people by surprise. In a speech delivered that day, he pardoned the former president. In doing so, Gerald Ford ultimately sacrificed his own career. I reread that speech of Ford's this week, And though I well remember watching it on television, I'd forgotten how thoroughly theological it was and is. Google it when you go home. Gerald Ford's pardon speech. It'll come up. Read it for yourself. I do believe, proclaimed President Ford, I do believe that the buck stops here, that I cannot rely upon public opinion polls to tell me what is right. I do believe that right makes might, and that if I am wrong, 10 angels swearing I was right would make no difference. I do believe with all my heart and mind and spirit that I, not as president, but as a humble servant of God, I will receive justice without mercy if I fail to show mercy. Needless to say, there were some who were pleased with President Ford's actions, but others claimed he struck a deal with Nixon before being appointed vice president, and many felt that he was subverting justice. Richard Nixon, many said, didn't deserve to be pardoned. He didn't deserve to be forgiven. And of course he didn't. Richard Nixon had shattered the public trust. He had abused the power of his office. He had misled the people with obfuscation and untruths. Ford's critics were right. Richard Nixon didn't deserve to be forgiven. But here's the catch. No one ever deserves to be forgiven. No one ever deserves to be forgiven. For by definition, forgiveness is granted to those who deserve something else. You can't earn forgiveness. You can't deserve forgiveness. Forgiveness, by definition, is always a gift. We've been looking at the Jacob stories now for the last 5 weeks. Jacob didn't deserve to be forgiven by Esau. Jacob had acted in a manner which totally shattered his family's trust. He had used trickery to get his brother's birthright. He had cheated his father-in-law Laban out of property. He had practiced a cruel form of deception to receive his own father's blessing, taking advantage of a dying man on his deathbed. How more obnoxious can you get than that? Jacob was a liar and a cheat and an all-around jerk. Yet in our Jacob story this morning, he is granted forgiveness by Esau. The brothers hadn't seen each other in years. Jacob was on the run, fearing for his own life. Then one day he hears Esau is approaching where he is. So what does he do? He sends ahead a present. You didn't hear it in the reading this morning. It happens before the reading. He sends ahead a present to his brother Esau, hoping to appease him. A really big present. 220 goats, 220 sheep, 30 camels, 40 cows, 10 bulls, and 30 donkeys. No partridge in a pear tree, but it certainly put Noah to shame. When they finally meet up, Jacob doesn't even face his brother head on. What does he do? He puts out row after row after row of his wives and children ahead of him so that the first people Esau will encounter will be the weak and those who he will take pity on. And then when Esau finally makes his way to Jacob, what does Jacob do? He bows and scrapes, not just once, but 7 times. He does everything in his power to earn Esau's pardon. But, says the text, but Esau ran to meet him and embraced him and fell on his neck and kissed him, and they wept. Esau was clearly ready to forgive his brother long before the gifts, long before the bowing and scraping. As one scholar writes, this impressive list of welcoming activities is unparalleled elsewhere in Genesis. In fact, in that culture, this may well have entailed forgiveness. This may have been a forgiveness ritual. Long before the bowing and scraping, despite all that Jacob had done, and he had done much, Esau forgave him. And now he demonstrates it with an embrace, with a kiss, with tears. You are my brother, and for all you've done, and let's not forget you have done much, I cannot help but love you. You are forgiven, Jacob. Let's start over. Let's start fresh. Let's bind up our wounds and be a family again. Esau saw past the personal affronts and the injuries. He saw the need to stop feuding and to ensure the future of their family. Gerald Ford said he was also looking ahead. And what he saw looking ahead was a long national struggle that would have made the O.J. trial look tame by comparison. And so he pardoned Richard Nixon. He pardoned Nixon so that the nation might begin the long and difficult healing process that lay ahead. In the end, he said, it is not the ultimate fate of Richard Nixon that most concerns me, though surely it troubles each and every compassionate person. My concern, said Gerald Ford, is the immediate future of this great country. As Desmond Tutu, former Archbishop of South Africa and no stranger to the need for forgiveness and reconciliation in a post-apartheid world, once said, without forgiveness, there is no future. Without forgiveness, there is no future. Run that as a headline atop all of the headlines in today's New York Times. Esau understood that. So too, apparently, did Gerald Ford. Of course, in all probability, you nor I will ever be put in Gerald Ford's position and be called on to make a decision that impacts the whole course of the nation's future. Nor may we ever find ourselves in as big a family feud as that which ruled the lives of Jacob and Esau. But you and I, more than likely, have found ourselves in positions where we could choose. We could choose whether or not to offer forgiveness to another human being. Perhaps a coworker cheated you out of a promotion. Maybe your spouse committed the unthinkable. Perhaps a fellow student spoke behind your back to classmates and shared one of your most intimate secrets. Maybe you have a son or daughter who rarely calls you and never comes to visit. Maybe a friend broke your trust and did exactly what he or she said they wouldn't. And you're hurt. You're disappointed. You're frustrated. You're angry. How could he do this to me? What right did she have to say those things? Why should I forgive her? She doesn't deserve to be forgiven. But forgiveness, my friends, isn't really about the other person. It's about you. As Joan Chittister writes, forgiveness is more important to the one who forgives than to the one who is forgiven. For you are suffering more than the person you hold responsible for the hurt. Forgiveness doesn't mean saying that what you did is okay. Esau never said to Jacob, stealing my birthright, that was okay, bro. It wasn't. What he did was wrong. Forgiveness doesn't mean there are no consequences. Richard Nixon became a pariah for most of the rest of his life. Forgiveness doesn't mean things will go back to the way they used to be. Did you listen carefully to the end of the story? Jacob and Esau reconcile, but then they go their separate ways. They no longer live under one tent as one family. Things didn't go back to the way they used to be. But there was real forgiveness. And Richard Nixon, he lost the presidency, all that he had worked for his whole career. No, forgiveness means letting go of the need for revenge. Forgiveness means letting go of the anger. Forgiveness means deciding to live and let live. When Jacob realizes he has been forgiven, he urges Esau to accept the gifts he's offered to him, not as payment for forgiveness. A true forgiveness is never for sale. No, he urges Esau to accept the gifts as a sign of Jacob's gratitude. Please accept my gifts, he says, because God has dealt graciously with me and because I have everything I want. Indeed, to see you is like seeing the face of God. Today, thousands of years after Jacob's time, 40 years after Watergate, there is still much conflict in the world, and often in our own lives as well. And while you nor I may be able to bring an end to the war in Gaza or the age-old struggles in northern Iraq, or even the wrangling in Washington, D.C., while we may not be able to do much about any of those things, you and I can address the conflicts in our own lives using that ancient tool called forgiveness. So ask yourself today, sisters and brothers, who do I need to forgive? What hardness needs melting in my heart? Who is it that needs to see the face of God in you? Amen. Sisters and brothers, it is so easy today to listen to the news or watch it online or read the paper and be enormously discouraged about the prospects for peace. When will it ever end in Israel and Palestine? What's going on in Iraq? How do we really know things are settled in the Sudan? And even in Washington, can't they get their heads together? But peace begins with you and me. Peace begins with forgiveness. Instead of worrying about conflicts that we can't touch, let us be concerned about those people in our own lives who need our forgiving embrace. Let there be peace on earth, and let it begin with me. Know that you are loved and forgiven by a God who sets the example and calls us to do the same. Know you are loved by the one who taught us. Forgive us our debts as we forgive others. Hard work, but I have great faith in you. Amen.